The dust don't lie. Shows every track, every boot print, every place a man stood his ground or cut and ran. Eli. Garrett had been reading dust for 40 years, and what he saw that morning made his stomach drop. Fresh surveyor stakes driven into ground that had been Garrett land since before the war. Clean cuts on his fence wire, not weather damage. Someone had been measuring his property while he slept. He rode into Redemption Flats to file a complaint. The land office clerk smirked before Eli finished talking. Mr. Crenshaw already filed on that parcel. Says your deed's got boundary errors. Whispers from the men behind him. The smell of ink and old paper. His hands shook holding his deed. 40 years of work reduced to one piece of paper that suddenly meant nothing. You're welcome to contest it, Mr. Garrett. Auction's in 14 days. He rode home with shame burning in his throat, found his barn door ajar. Inside, collapsed in the straw, a woman bleeding through her leather dress, clutching a satchel like her life depended on it. She had a knife in her hand before Eli took 2 steps into the barn. Dark eyes, fierce despite the pain. Blood soaking through the beadwork on her shoulder. Apache, he knew it from the silver bracelets, the way her hair was braided, the intricate patterns on her dress. She dragged herself into the corner where the hay was thickest, leaving a trail of red across the boards. The satchel was clutched to her chest with her free hand. Whatever was inside, she wasn't letting go. Easy, Eli said, keeping his voice low. He raised both hands, palms out. I ain't here to hurt you. She said something in her language. Sharp, warning. The knife trembled, but she didn't lower it. Eli stayed where he was. The barn smelled of old hay and copper blood, dust motes spinning slow in the light that came through the slats. He could hear her breathing. Ragged, shallow. The kind of breathing that meant she was running out of time. You're hurt bad, he said. I can see that much. And you're on my land, in my barn, bleeding on my floor. And he took one slow step forward. So the way I figure it, we got 2 choices. You can stick me with that knife and bleed out alone, or you can let me help. Her eyes searched his face, reading him the way he read dust, looking for the lie, the trap, the thing that would get her killed. The knife lowered an inch. Who sent you? She rasped. Her English was accented but clear. I ain't been sent by nobody. Eli knelt slowly, keeping his hands visible. But somebody's coming for you, I reckon. That wound didn't make itself? Something flickered in her expression. Fear, maybe, or recognition that she was out of options. The sound of hoofbeats reached them both at the same moment, distant but coming closer. Her grip on the satchel tightened. They followed me, she whispered. Eli didn't ask who. Didn't matter right now. He moved to the barn door and peered through the gap. 3 riders coming up the road, kicking dust. He recognized the lead horse, belonged to one of Crenshaw's men. His jaw tightened. Can you stand? She tried, made it halfway up before her legs buckled. Eli caught her, felt the heat of fever through her clothes, the sticky warmth of blood on his hands. She weighed almost nothing. The feed sacks, he said, half carrying her toward the back corner. Get under them, don't make a sound. She clutched the satchel, even as he lowered her down, even as he piled the rough burlap over her body. Her eyes stayed on his face until the last sack covered her. Don't move, he said. Whatever you hear. He wiped the blood from his hands onto his trousers, kicked straw over the trail she'd left, and walked out into the sunlight just as the riders reached his fence. The lead man was called Sullivan. Eli had seen him in town, hard eyes, soft hands, the kind of man who hurt people for wages and slept fine after. Morning, Mr. Garrett. Sullivan didn't dismount. The other 2 spread out, scanning the property with the lazy thoroughness of men who expected to find what they were looking for. Something I can help you with. Looking for a thief, Apache woman, wounded. Stole something valuable from Mr. Crenshaw's survey operation. Sullivan's eyes moved to the barn. You seen anyone come through here? The smell of horse sweat mixed with the sage on the wind. Eli felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. One wrong word, and everything fell apart. Ain't seen nobody, he said. Been out riding my fence line since dawn. Someone cut my wire. Sullivan studied him. The silence stretched like a held breath. Mind if we look around? I do mind, actually. Eli kept his voice even. This is my property. You want to search it? You bring the sheriff and a warrant. One of the other men had dismounted, was walking toward the barn. Eli stepped into his path. I said no. The man looked to Sullivan. Sullivan's jaw worked, chewing on something that wasn't tobacco. Mr. Crenshaw ain't gonna like this. Mr. Crenshaw can take it up with me personal if he's got a problem. Another long moment. Eli could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the sweat starting at his collar. If they pushed past him, if they went into that barn... Sullivan smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. We'll be back, Mr. Garrett, and if we find out you're lying... He leaned forward in his saddle. They hang men for harboring fugitives in this territory, especially fugitives of her kind. I know the penalty for lying, Eli said. Reckon I know the penalty for trespassing too. Sullivan held his gaze for 3 more heartbeats. Then he wheeled his horse and the others followed, riding back down the road they'd come. Eli watched until they disappeared over the rise. Only then did he let himself breathe. When he went back into the barn, she was already pushing the feed sacks aside, the satchel still pressed against her chest. Her eyes met his. Not trust, not yet, but something close to it. They'll come back, she said. I know. Why did you lie for me? Eli didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense, anyway. He just looked at her, bleeding and desperate in his barn, and knew he'd do it again. Let's get you inside, he said. We got a lot to talk about. He brought her inside and laid her on the kitchen table. Only surface, sturdy enough to work on. The cabin was small, bare of anything that resembled comfort. A stove that barely held heat, shelves with more dust than supplies. He'd been living like a ghost in his own home, and now he had someone bleeding in it. This is gonna hurt, he said, reaching for the whiskey bottle he kept for nights when the silence got too loud. She nodded once, jaw tight. The wound was a bullet graze along her ribs, deep enough to bleed heavy, shallow enough that she'd live if infection didn't set in. He poured whiskey over a clean cloth, pressed it to the torn flesh. She made no sound, but her hand shot out and gripped the table edge hard enough to whiten her knuckles. They shot me, she said through clenched teeth, for taking what was already stolen. When Eli paused, cloth in hand. What do you mean? Her eyes went to the satchel, still clutched against her side even now. She hesitated, then pushed it toward him. Open it. Inside were papers. Survey maps, official-looking, covered in measurements and boundary lines. Eli spread them on the table beside her, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Then he saw his name. Garrett E. Noison Parcel 7, disputed, his land, his property, marked in red ink like a target. I don't understand, he said slowly. These are survey documents, federal surveys. They are forgeries. She pushed herself up on one elbow, wincing. Your land, my people's land, the creek, the water rights, all of it marked for one man. Her finger traced down to the signature at the bottom of each page. Silas Crenshaw, certified surveyor, Arizona Territory. The name hit Eli like a fist to the chest. The same man who'd filed on his parcel, the same man whose riders had just searched his property. He's stealing my land, Eli said. The words came out flat, numb. He is stealing everyone's land. She met his eyes. The boundaries on these maps are wrong, deliberately wrong. They move the lines to swallow smaller properties, to claim water that belongs to my people by treaty. She touched the papers with something like hatred. I took these from his office. Proof of what he has done. Eli stared at the maps. 40 years of work. 40 years of drought and loss and hanging on by his fingernails. And now some speculator with a pen and a bot judge was going to take it all with a signature. Why? He asked. Why risk your life for this? She was quiet for a moment. The only sound was the wind pushing against the walls. Because no one else would believe an Apache woman, she said finally. So I made sure to bring proof they could not ignore. The sheriff arrived 2 hours later. Eli heard the horse before he saw it, single rider, coming slow. He stepped onto the porch with his hand near his hip, though he didn't own a pistol anymore. Sold it last winter to buy feed. Lyle Dunning dismounted with the stiffness of a man carrying weight he didn't want. His badge caught the afternoon light. His face was gray. Eli. Lyle. They'd known each other 20 years, fought in the same regiment during the war. Eli had saved Dunning's horse once, during a skirmish. Farrier work under fire, pulling a bullet from the animal's flank while lead flew overhead. Dunning never forgot it. But today, Dunning wasn't looking at him like a friend. I got papers, the sheriff said. He held out a folded document like it might bite him. From Crenshaw, filed this morning with Judge Morton. Eli took the papers, read them slow, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. Affidavit of complaint. The words swam in front of him. Harboring a fugitive. Obstruction of federal survey operations. Theft of government property. This is horseshit, Eli said quietly. I know. Dunning's voice was tired. But horseshit or not, it's got a judge's seal on it. If you don't turn over the woman and whatever she took, you forfeit your land and face criminal charges. The smell of dust and sage, the distant lowing of his 2 remaining cattle, everything he had left, measured against the woman lying in his kitchen with proof of a crime. She didn't steal anything, Lyle. Crenshaw's the thief. She's got maps that prove... I don't want to hear it. Dunning held up a hand. Whatever she's got, whatever you think you know, it don't matter. The law says what it says. And right now, the law says you're harboring a fugitive. The law's being bought. Probably. Dunning's jaw worked. But I still got to enforce it. I ain't got a choice. There's always a choice. The sheriff looked at him, really looked, the way he used to before everything got complicated. Something flickered in his eyes. Shame, maybe. Or the memory of who he used to be. You got 3 days, Dunning said finally. 3 days to turn her over. After that, I come back with deputies. And if I don't? Dunning mounted his horse, sat there for a long moment, staring at the horizon. Then I watch you hang, Eli, and I hate myself for it. And he rode away without looking back. Eli stood on the porch, the papers crumpling in his fist, the trap closing around him like a noose. 3 days. Surrender her and lose his honor, keep her and lose everything else. Inside, Ayanna was waiting, and somewhere out there Crenshaw was counting his stolen acres. Doc Virgil Hobbs rode up the next morning, his medical bag hanging from the saddle horn like an old habit. 67 years old, white hair thin as corn silk, hands still steady enough to cut a man open and sew him back together. He'd heard about the papers. News traveled fast in a town with nothing else to talk about. You look like hell, Virgil said, dismounting with a grunt. Feel like it too. Eli met him on the porch. Coffee's hot if you want some. What I want is to know what kind of trouble you've gotten yourself into. Virgil tied his horse and followed Eli inside. His eyes went immediately to the woman sitting at the kitchen table, her side wrapped in torn bedsheet, her hand resting near the satchel. This would be the fugitive, Virgil said. This would be my guest. Virgil studied her for a long moment. Then he set down his bag and crossed to her without asking permission. Let me see that wound. Ayanna looked to Eli. He nodded. She lifted the edge of the bandage. Virgil leaned in, squinting, his fingers gentle as he examined the torn flesh. The smell of carbolic soap rose from his hands, the mark of a man who'd learned the hard way that clean wounds healed better than dirty ones. Bullet graze, he said. You did decent work, Eli. She'll live if the infection stays down. He reached into his bag, pulled out a small tin. Carbolic salve, changed the dressing twice a day. Thank you, Ayanna said quietly. Virgil straightened, his knees popping. Don't thank me yet. From what I hear, living might be the hard part. They sat on the porch, the three of them, drinking coffee that was more water than beans. The afternoon heat pressed down like a weight. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled slow against the white sky. Crenshaw's been busy, Virgil said. He held the tin cup in both hands, steam rising past his wire spectacles. Filed papers on 6 parcels this month alone, all small ranchers, all with water access. All with deeds that suddenly got boundary errors. He did the same thing 3 counties over, Ayanna said. I heard the stories. A widow lost her farm. 2 families driven off land their grandfathers settled. Virgil nodded slowly. I remember that. Quiet title action, they called it. By the time anyone figured out what happened, Crenshaw owned everything from the river to the ridge. He looked at Eli. Man's got a pattern. Problem is, nobody's alive or willing to testify against him. What about the surveys? Eli asked. If we can prove they're forged. Prove it how? His name's on the official seal. He's got a judge in his pocket and enough money to buy 3 more. Virgil shook his head. Paper crimes need paper proof, the kind that can't be argued with. Ayanna's hand went to the satchel. These maps show the fraud, but they are copies. He will claim I forged them. Then we need something he can't dismiss. Virgil was quiet for a moment, thinking. The wind picked up, rattling the loose boards on the porch rail. The original treaty, the one the tribe signed 30 years ago, when the boundaries were first drawn. Ayanna stiffened. If we had that map, Virgil continued, we could prove his surveys are off by miles, show that he's claiming land that was never his to claim. He looked at her. Your people would have kept a copy, they always do. It exists, Ayanna said slowly. At Red Mesa. In the keeping of... She stopped. In the keeping of who? The silence stretched. Eli watched her face, the way her jaw tightened, the way her eyes went somewhere far away. My father, she said finally. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, painting everything gold and red. Eli walked with Ayanna to the well, helped her draw water for the evening. Her movements were stiff, careful, but stronger than yesterday. Tell me, he said. She was quiet for a long moment. The well rope creaked as she lowered the bucket, the sound mixing with the wind through the dry grass. My father is Tahatan, she said, chief of our band. The elder, whose signature appears on the treaty Crenshaw claims, gave him the land. Eli's hand stopped on the rope. Your father's signature is on those forged documents? A forgery of his signature? He never signed away our water rights. He never would. Her voice was fierce, but underneath it, he heard something else. Something that sounded like grief. Crenshaw needed a chief's mark to make the session look real. He chose my father's name. Then your father can testify. He can prove the signature is false. He will not help me. She pulled the bucket up, water sloshing over the sides. I took those documents without permission. I acted alone, in secret, against his wishes. Among my people, a daughter who defies her father. She stopped, her knuckles white on the bucket handle. Is what? Cursed. The word came out flat. Cast out. I am already dead to them. The smell of wet stone rose from the well. The last light caught the silver on her wrists, made it glow like something sacred. I believe you, Eli said. She looked at him. Not with trust, not yet, but with something close to it. Why? Because I've seen Crenshaw's kind before. Men who take what ain't theirs and dress it up in legal paper. Men who count on decent folks being too scared or too tired to fight back. He met her eyes. I'm tired, all right, but I ain't scared. Not anymore. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, something shifting in her expression. Then we fight together. Together, Eli agreed. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. The only proof that could save them both was 100 miles away, held by a man who'd disowned his own daughter, and they had 3 days left. Crenshaw came the next morning. Eli heard the horse before he saw it, expensive hooves on hard pan, the kind of gait that said money. He stepped onto the porch with the branding iron in his hand, not as a weapon, just something to hold, something that reminded him who he was. Silas Crenshaw dismounted slow, taking his time. He was younger than Eli expected, maybe 45, with soft hands and a suit that cost more than Eli's entire herd had been worth. His cologne cut through the smell of sage and dust, something sweet and wrong. Mr. Garrett, Crenshaw smiled like they were old friends. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I know who you are. Then you know I'm a reasonable man. The Crenshaw looked around the property, the sagging barn, the empty corral, the 2 gaunt cattle chewing at nothing. This is a hard life you've built. I respect that. It takes a certain kind of stubbornness to hold on to dirt that's trying to kill you. Get to the point. Crenshaw's smile didn't waver. I'm here to make you an offer. A generous one considering the circumstances. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded paper, held it up like a gift. Your tax debt. $127. Due in, he made a show of counting, 11 days now. That's a lot of money for a man with 2 cattle and a dry well. Eli said nothing. I'm prepared to forgive that debt entirely. Pay it off myself as a gesture of goodwill. Crenshaw tucked his paper away. I'll also withdraw my filing on your parcel. Drop the obstruction charges. You keep your land, free and clear. And what do you want in return? The woman. Crenshaw's voice didn't change, but his eyes did. Something cold sliding into place behind the smile. And whatever she stole from me, that's all. Just hand her over, and this unpleasantness goes away. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the smell of dry grass. Eli turned the branding iron in his hand, feeling the weight of it. His father had made this iron 40 years ago, forged it himself, shaped the Garrett brand with his own hands. It had marked every calf born on this land for 2 generations. You're a thief, Eli said quietly. Crenshaw's smile flickered. I beg your pardon. I've seen the maps, the ones she took from you. Forged surveys, fake boundaries, land that ain't yours dressed up in legal paper. Eli stepped forward, and something in his voice made Crenshaw take a half step back. You're stealing from me, from her people, from anyone too small to fight back. Those are serious accusations. They're the truth. Crenshaw's mask slipped just for a moment. Eli saw what was underneath, not anger, not fear, contempt. The look of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't buy his way out of. You're making a mistake, Mr. Garrett. A costly one. Crenshaw straightened his jacket. I came here in good faith, offering you a way out. But if you'd rather hang on to your pride than your property, Eli raised the branding iron. Not threatening, just showing. You see this? My father made this. His father taught him how. 3 generations of Garretts have used this iron to mark what's ours. He met Crenshaw's eyes. I've never branded an innocent thing in my life. Not a calf that wasn't mine, not a horse I didn't raise. And I ain't about to start now. She's a thief. She's a witness to what you've done, to what you're still doing. Eli lowered the iron. You want her? You come back with an army, because that's what it's going to take. Crenshaw stared at him for a long moment. The wind blew dust between them. You've chosen your grave, Mr. Garrett. His voice was flat now, all pretense gone. I hope your principles keep you warm in it. He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Eli watched until he disappeared over the rise, the branding iron still warm in his grip. Ayanna was standing in the doorway when he turned around. I heard, she said. Eli walked past her into the cabin, set the branding iron on its hook above the cold forge. His hands were shaking and he didn't want her to see. He'll be back, he said with the sheriff, with whoever he needs to make this legal. I know. She crossed to the window, looking out at the empty land. The afternoon light caught the lines of her face, strong, tired, carrying something heavier than a bullet wound. "There is more I haven't told you," she said quietly. Eli waited. "My father, Tahatan, he is more than a chief. He is the keeper of our history, the one who holds the treaties, the records, the memory of our people." She turned to face him. "When Crenshaw forged his signature, he didn't just steal land. He made my father look like a traitor, a man who sold his own people's water for money." "But he didn't sign. You said so yourself." "I know that. You know that. But my father's enemies within the tribe, they used it against him. Said he was weak, that he had betrayed us in secret." Her voice cracked, just slightly. "He has spent 2 years trying to prove his innocence. And I—" She stopped. The silence filled the cabin like smoke. "You what?" "I was supposed to wait, to let him handle it his way, through councils and negotiations." She shook her head. "But I couldn't. I watched Crenshaw's men survey our land, drive stakes into sacred ground, and I couldn't wait anymore. So I took the proof myself. Without telling him. Without telling anyone." She met his eyes, and he saw it there, the thing she'd been carrying since he found her in the barn. "Among my people, a daughter who defies her father in matters of the tribe, she is worse than dead. She is erased, her name is not spoken. You knew that when you took the maps." "Yes." The word hung between them. Eli thought about what it meant. To risk everything, not just your life, but your name, your family, your place in the world, to do it alone, knowing no one would thank you for it. "Why?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady again. "Because my father taught me that some things matter more than one person's life. The land, the water, the future of our children." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "He also taught me to fight for what is right, even when it costs everything. I suppose I learned that lesson too well." Eli looked at her. This woman, who had given up everything to carry a satchel full of truth through hostile territory, who had bled on his barn floor rather than let the evidence die with her. "You're not cursed," he said. "My people would disagree. Then maybe they need to see what I see." He picked up the forged surveys from the table, held them up. "A woman who risked her life for justice. A daughter who loves her father enough to fight for his name, even if he never forgives her for it." Ayana's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "You are a strange man, Eli Garrett." "So I've been told." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert red and gold. Somewhere out there, Crenshaw was planning his next move. Somewhere out there, a father was searching for a daughter who had vanished. And in 11 days, everything Eli had built would go up for auction. But right now in this cabin, 2 people who had nothing left to lose looked at each other and saw something worth fighting for. "We need that treaty map," Eli said, the original. "Without it, we're just 2 voices against a man with money and judges. My father will not help me." Maybe not, but Doc Virgil's already halfway to Red Mesa." Eli glanced at the horizon, where the last light was fading. "Maybe he can convince your father that this is bigger than one daughter's disobedience." Ayana shook her head. "You don't know my father." "No," Eli agreed, "but I know what a man looks like when his honor's been stolen, and I know what he'll do to get it back." She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. "Then we wait," she said, "and we pray." I ain't much for praying. Neither am I," she almost smiled, "but I am learning." The night came down around them, heavy and dark, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of riders moving through the shadows. Eli couldn't sleep. The cabin was quiet, except for the wind pushing against the walls and the soft sound of Ayana's breathing from the bed he'd given her. He sat at the table in the dark, a candle burning low, his father's Bible open in front of him. He hadn't read from it in years, not since Martha died, not since the fever took her and left him alone in a house that suddenly felt too big for one man. But tonight, he wasn't looking for scripture. He was looking for a place to put the truth. He found a blank page at the back, the kind folks used for recording births and deaths, the markers of a family's passage through time. His hand trembled as he picked up the pen. "To whoever finds this," he wrote. The ink scratched against the paper, too loud in the silence. "My name is Eli Garrett. I own the land called Garrett Flats, 40 miles east of Redemption Flats, Arizona Territory. I am writing this on the night of August 14th, 1878, because I do not know if I will live to speak these words myself." He paused, listening to the wind. Somewhere outside, a coyote called, long and lonely, the sound of something searching in the dark. "A man named Silas Crenshaw is stealing land. Mine. The Apache treaty lands to the east. Anyone else too small to fight back. He does it with forged surveys and bought judges and the kind of legal paper that looks real until you hold it up to the light. I have seen the proof. A woman named Ayana brought it to me at the cost of everything she had. She is not a thief. She is the daughter of Chief Tahatan, whose signature Crenshaw forged to make his theft look legal. I am choosing to protect her. I am choosing to fight. If I die for that choice, I want someone to know why. He wrote for another hour, documenting everything, the forged maps, Crenshaw's visit, the sheriff's papers, the threat that hung over them all. His hand cramped, but he didn't stop. The words needed to exist somewhere outside his own head. They needed to survive, even if he didn't. When he finished, he folded the pages carefully and tucked them into the Bible. Between the Old Testament and the New, the leather cover was cracked and worn, soft from 40 years of handling. It smelled like dust and old paper and something else, something that reminded him of his mother's hands. He closed the Bible and looked at the wall where his deed hung in its wooden frame. 40 years of work, one piece of paper. Reckon a man's worth ain't measured in acres, he said quietly to no one. The candle guttered and went out, leaving him in darkness. Doc Virgil arrived at first light, his horse lathered and blowing. Eli met him on the porch, coffee in hand, already knowing from the old man's face that the news wasn't good. Crenshaw moved the auction up, Virgil said, dismounting with a grunt. 3 days, not 11. Filed an emergency motion with Judge Morton last night. Says your failure to appear on the obstruction charges constitutes forfeiture. The coffee turned bitter in Eli's mouth. Can he do that? Apparently he can. Morton signed off on it this morning. Virgil tied his horse, his movements stiff with exhaustion. By Friday, your land goes to the highest bidder, which means Crenshaw, since nobody else will dare bid against him. Ayanna appeared in the doorway, her wound wrapped fresh, her eyes sharp despite the early hour. 3 days, she said, 3 days. Eli looked at the horizon, where the sun was just clearing the ridge, red and gold like the land was bleeding into the sky. He thought about the letter in the Bible, the words he'd written in the dark. He thought about Martha, about his father, about every choice that had brought him to this moment. Then we stop hiding, he said. Virgil raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, we ride to the county seat, file a counterclaim, demand a public hearing. Eli set down his coffee cup. If we're going down in daylight, not slinking around in the shadows like we've got something to be ashamed of. That's a 2-day ride, Virgil said. And Crenshaw's got men on every road. Then we go around them. Ayanna stepped forward. I'm coming with you. You're still hurt. My father's signature is on those forgeries. I'm the only one who can identify his hand, who can testify that he never signed. Her voice was steady. You need me. Eli looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, we leave within the hour. Virgil cleared his throat. There's one more thing I can do. He looked toward the eastern horizon, where the land rose toward the distant mesas. Someone needs to tell her father what's happening before this goes too far. Ayanna shook her head. He won't come. I told you. Maybe not for you, Virgil's voice was gentle, but maybe for the truth. Maybe for his own name, which Crenshaw has been dragging through the mud for 2 years. He mounted his horse, every movement speaking of age and weariness and something else. Determination. Let an old man try. It's been a while since I did something that mattered. Doc, Eli started. I know the way to Red Mesa. Made the ride once, 20 years ago, when their camp had a fever outbreak. Virgil smiled, just slightly. They didn't kill me then, might not kill me now. He turned his horse toward the rising sun. 3 days, he called back. I'll either be there with help or I won't be there at all. Either way, you fight like it's the last fight you've got. Then he was gone, dust rising behind him, disappearing into the red morning light. Ayanna watched him go, her face unreadable. He's a fool, she said quietly. Maybe. Eli turned back toward the cabin. But sometimes fools are all we've got. Within the hour, they were riding west toward the county seat, toward the showdown that would decide everything. Behind them, the land waited in silence, and the clock kept ticking down. They made it halfway to the county seat before Crenshaw's men found them. The road wound through a narrow canyon, red rock walls rising on both sides like the bones of some ancient creature. Eli had chosen the route for its cover, but cover worked both ways. He realized his mistake when he heard the click of a rifle being cocked somewhere above them. Get down! He threw himself sideways, pulling Ayanna with him as the first shot cracked through the air. The bullet sparked off the rock where her head had been a heartbeat before. Their horses screamed and bolted, leaving them scrambling for cover behind a tumble of boulders. 3 men. Eli could see them now, positioned on the ridge, Sullivan and 2 others, rifles trained down on the canyon floor. Professional, patient, the kind of men who got paid by results. The satchel, Ayanna gasped. She was clutching her side, the wound reopened by the fall. I still have it. Keep your head down. Another shot rang out, sending stone chips flying. Eli pressed his back against the boulder, breathing hard, calculating angles. No way to climb out. No way to run. The horses were gone, and even if they weren't, they'd be cut down before they made 10 yards. "Give us the woman," Sullivan called from above. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. "Hand her over and you can walk away, Garrett. Last chance." Eli looked at Ayanna. Blood was seeping through her bandages, dark against the cloth. Her jaw was set, her eyes fierce despite the pain. "Don't you dare," she said quietly. He almost smiled. "Go to hell, Sullivan." The next shot came lower, closer. Eli grabbed a fist-sized rock from the ground. Useless against rifles, but it was something to hold. His hand was shaking. Not from fear, from anger. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Coming fast from the west, from the direction of the county seat, Sullivan heard it too. Eli saw him turn, saw his posture shift from predator to prey in a single heartbeat. A group of riders crested the ridge behind them. 5 men in dusters, badges glinting in the afternoon sun. County deputies, by the look of them, riding hard with purpose. Sullivan and his men exchanged looks. Then they were scrambling down the far side of the ridge, their horses' hooves clattering on loose stone, disappearing into the desert before the deputies could close the distance. The lead deputy, a heavy-set man with a gray mustache and tired eyes, reined up at the canyon's edge and looked down at Eli and Ayanna huddled behind their boulder. "You two, the ones heading to the county seat? The ones with the papers about Silas Crenshaw?" Eli stood, slowly, helping Ayanna to her feet. "How'd you know?" The deputy's expression was grim. "Because you ain't the first. And if what I'm hearing is true, you might be the last." The county seat was larger than Redemption Flats. A proper town with brick buildings and gas lamps and a courthouse that looked like it meant business. The deputies brought them straight to the land office, a squat building with barred windows and a clerk who looked like he'd seen too many lies pass across his desk. His name was Aldridge. He wore spectacles that made his eyes look too large for his face, and his fingers were stained with ink down to the second knuckle. When Ayanna spread the forged surveys on his desk, he studied them with the intensity of a man reading his own death warrant. "These are Crenshaw's surveys," Aldridge said slowly. "I've seen this seal before. They're forgeries," Ayanna said. "The boundaries are wrong, deliberately wrong. I can see that." Aldridge pulled open a drawer, rifled through files, pulled out 3 more documents, laid them beside the maps Ayanna had brought. "Recognize these?" Eli leaned in. 3 more surveys, same seal, same handwriting. Different properties. A widow's farm near the river, a mining claim in the eastern hills, a ranch that bordered Apache treaty land. "All filed by Crenshaw," Aldridge said. "All later vacated for fraud. Took years to prove, cost lives and fortunes, but the courts agreed. The boundaries were falsified. He looked up at them over his spectacles. "Man's got a pattern. Problem is, by the time anyone figures it out, he's already moved on to the next county." Eli felt something shift in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something close. "You're saying there's a record, proof that he's done this before. Much I'm saying if you can demonstrate that the signature on your documents is forged, his whole house of cards comes down, not just your parcel, everything he's filed in this territory." Aldridge tapped the stack of papers. "The precedent is already set. 3 times he's been caught. 3 times the courts ruled against him. A 4th time, with proper evidence. He's finished," Ayanna said. "He's finished." The smell of old paper and ink, the sound of Aldridge's pen scratching as he pulled out a fresh form, the weight of the moment pressing down on Eli's shoulders like a physical thing. "There's a hearing scheduled for Friday morning," Aldridge said. "Emergency session, called by Judge Morton at Crenshaw's request. He means to finalize the auction and the obstruction charges all at once." Morton's in his pocket," Eli said. "Morton's in everyone's pocket. But even bought judges have to follow precedent when the evidence is clear enough." Aldridge slid the form across the desk. "File a counterclaim. Demand the right to present your evidence in open court. If you can prove that signature is forged." "The only proof is at Red Mesa," Ayanna said. Her voice was steady, but Eli could hear the strain underneath. "The original treaty map, my father's true signature." Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. "Then I suggest you pray your father decides to show up." Ayanna signed the counterclaim. Her hand didn't shake. "Friday morning," she said. "We'll be there." "With proof?" She looked at Eli. He looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning its long descent toward the desert floor. Somewhere out there, Doc Virgil was riding toward Red Mesa. Somewhere out there, a father was deciding whether to forgive a daughter who had defied him. "With proof," Eli said. He hoped to God he wasn't lying. The boarding house in the county seat was small and clean, with walls thin enough to hear every creak and cough from the rooms on either side. Eli paid for 2 nights with the last coins he had, enough to get them to Friday, not enough to get them home if things went wrong. He gave Ayanna the bed. She didn't argue. The ride had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit, and by nightfall she was asleep, her breathing slow and even, one hand still resting near the satchel. Eli sat in the chair by the window watching the street below. The town was quiet at this hour, just the occasional drunk stumbling out of the saloon, the distant bark of a dog, the soft hiss of gas lamps burning against the dark. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ranch. The barn where he'd found her. The well he'd dug with his own hands 20 years ago, when the world was younger and Martha was still alive. The fence line his father had laid out, walking the boundary with a measuring rope and a prayer, all of it slipping away, all of it riding on a hearing that might already be decided. After a while, he gave up on rest and stepped out onto the narrow balcony. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of dust and sage and something sweeter, honeysuckle maybe, growing wild in somebody's yard. The stars were thick overhead, the kind of sky you only got out here, away from the cities and their smoke. He didn't hear her come out, just felt the boards shift slightly as she settled beside him, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. "You should be resting," he said. "So should you." They stood in silence for a while, looking up at the stars. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Another answered. The sound of the desert talking to itself. "I came out west to start over," Eli said finally. The words surprised him. He hadn't meant to say them out loud. After the war, after everything, thought I could build something clean, something that was just mine. Ayanna didn't respond. Just waited, the way someone does when they know you need to talk more than you need to be answered. Lost my wife to fever 12 years ago, lost my herd to the drought, lost my savings to bad luck and worse timing. He shook his head. Thought the land was all I had left. The one thing nobody could take from me. And now? He looked at her. The starlight caught the silver at her wrists, the lines of her face, the quiet strength in her eyes. Now I reckon I was wrong about what matters. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his hand, brief, deliberate, warm against his weathered skin. My father used to say, "A man's land is his body, but his word is his soul." Her voice was soft, remembering. He taught me that honor was not something you could buy or sell, that it lived in your choices, not your possessions. Your father sounds like a hard man. He is. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. But he taught me what honor costs, even when the price is everything you have. Eli looked down at her hand on his, small and strong, scarred from work and weather, not so different from his own. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I want you to know I don't regret it, any of it." Neither do I. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, and for a moment the world felt smaller, just two people on a balcony, waiting for a dawn that might bring salvation or ruin. Sheriff Lyle Dunning found them at first light. Eli heard the boots on the stairs before the knock came. Heavy, deliberate, the walk of a man carrying weight. He opened the door with one hand near the branding iron he'd brought as his only weapon. Dunning stood in the hallway, hat in hands, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "You shouldn't be here," Eli said. "I know. If Crenshaw finds out, he won't. Not yet, anyway." Dunning glanced down the hallway, then stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I came to warn you. The hearing tomorrow, Morton's already made up his mind. Whatever proof you bring, he's going to find a way to dismiss it." "Then why are you here?" Dunning was quiet for a moment. His jaw worked, chewing on something he didn't want to say. "Because you saved my life once," he said finally. "That horse, during the skirmish at Miller's Creek, I'd have died if you hadn't pulled that bullet out, under fire." He met Eli's eyes. "And because I'm tired of serving men who don't deserve the badge, tired of watching good folks get crushed by money and paper and lies." He reached into his pocket and pulled something out. A star, tarnished silver, the word deputy stamped across its face. "Take this." Eli looked at it, not understanding. "What good is a deputy's star?" "It's my star. If they try to arrest you in that courtroom, if Morton orders you held before you can speak, you show them this. Tell them you're acting as my authorized representative." Dunning pressed it into Eli's palm. "It won't last long. 60 seconds maybe, but sometimes 60 seconds is all you need." The metal was cold against Eli's skin. He closed his fingers around it, feeling the weight of what Dunning was risking. "Why?" Dunning put his hat back on, turned toward the door. "Because I'd like to remember what it felt like to be a good man, before I forgot entirely." He left without another word. Eli stood there, holding the star, listening to his footsteps fade down the stairs. Ayanna appeared in the doorway, the satchel in her hands. "What was that about?" Before Eli could answer, they both heard it. A sound. low and distant, but growing. The rumble of hoofbeats, not a few horses, not a dozen, but more, many more, coming from the east, coming from Red Mesa. Eli walked to the window and looked out at the horizon, where the first gray light was touching the edge of the world. "I think," he said slowly, "your father got Doc's message." The hoofbeats grew louder as the sun cleared the horizon. Eli and Ayanna stood on the boardwalk outside the boarding house, watching the eastern road where it curved down from the hills. The town was waking up around them, shopkeepers opening doors, farmers heading to market, children running errands. Before the heat set in, one by one they stopped. One by one they turned to look at what was coming. The first riders crested the ridge like a wave breaking over stone. 10, then 20, then 50. They kept coming, spreading out across the flats in formation, their horses moving with a discipline that spoke of purpose rather than war. Dust rose behind them like a curtain, gold in the early light. 100 riders, then 200, then more. Eli's breath caught in his chest. He'd heard stories about Apache war parties. Every man in the territory had, but this wasn't a war party. There were no painted faces, no raised weapons, just riders, moving in silence, their eyes fixed on the town below. At their head rode a single figure in ceremonial dress. Even from this distance, Eli could see the authority in his bearing, the straight spine, the steady hands, the gaze that seemed to take in everything and judge it wanting. And beside him, looking half dead from exhaustion but very much alive, rode Doc Virgil Hobbs. "Your father," Eli said. Ayanna didn't answer. Her hand had gone to her chest, pressing against something that wasn't physical. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were bright with something she was fighting not to let fall. The riders stopped at the edge of town, 1,000 horses standing motionless in the morning light. The silence that followed was louder than the hoofbeats had been. Then Chief Tahatan dismounted. He was older than Eli had imagined. 60 at least, his hair streaked with gray, his face carved by decades of sun and wind and hard decisions. But there was nothing frail about him. He moved like a man who knew exactly who he was and what he'd come to do. He walked toward the boardwalk where Eli and Ayanna stood. The townspeople parted before him like water around a stone. No one spoke. No one dared. He stopped 10 feet away. His eyes found Ayanna, and something passed between them. Anger, grief, love. All of it tangled together in a look that lasted only a heartbeat but contained years. Then he turned to Eli. "You are the one who sheltered my daughter." It wasn't a question. Eli nodded anyway. "You hid her when Crenshaw's men came hunting. You lied for her, bled for her." Tahatan's voice was deep, resonant, accustomed to being obeyed. "Why?" Eli thought about all the ways he could answer. The practical reasons, the moral reasons, the reasons that sounded good but weren't quite true. In the end, he settled on the only thing that mattered. Because it was right. Tahatan studied him for a long moment. The silence stretched. Behind him, 1,000 warriors waited, their horses still as statues. Then the chief nodded once. "You will stand beside her when she speaks." It wasn't a request. The land office was already crowded when they arrived. Word had spread fast. 1,000 Apache riders at the edge of town, the disputed hearing about to begin, the possibility of something unprecedented about to unfold. Every chair was filled, every wall lined with bodies. The smell of sweat and tobacco and nervous energy hung thick in the air. Judge Morton sat behind his bench, looking like a man who'd swallowed something sour. Silas Crenshaw stood at the front of the room, his lawyers flanking him like attack dogs. His suit was immaculate, his smile confident, but Eli saw the way his eyes flickered toward the windows, toward the riders waiting outside. "This hearing will come to order," Morton said, his voice too loud in the crowded room. "We are here to address the matter of Garrett versus Crenshaw regarding disputed property boundaries and criminal charges of obstruction." Your Honor," Crenshaw's lawyer began. "My client moves to dismiss the counterclaim on grounds of we have evidence." Ayanna's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stepped forward, the satchel in her hands, and every eye turned to her. Morton's face reddened. "This is highly irregular. The defendant has no standing to—" "She has standing." The voice came from the doorway. Chief Tahatan stepped into the room, and the crowd parted before him. In his hands was a leather case, worn and cracked with age. "My daughter speaks for our people," Tahatan said. "And I speak for the truth that Silas Crenshaw has tried to bury." Morton's gavel came down hard. "This court does not recognize, then recognize this." Tahatan crossed to the bench and set the leather case before the judge. He opened it with the care of a man handling something sacred, and pulled out a document that made the room go silent, the original treaty map. Eli could see it even from where he stood. The carefully drawn boundaries, the signatures at the bottom, the official seals that marked it as genuine. 30 years old, kept safe through wars and relocations and everything else that had tried to erase Tahatan's people from the land. This is the true treaty, Tahatan said. Signed by my hand, witnessed by federal representatives, recorded in the archives of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He pointed to Crenshaw's surveys spread on the table nearby. Compare them. The boundaries do not match. They cannot match, because Mr. Crenshaw's surveys are forgeries. Aldridge, the clerk, stepped forward. His hands were shaking as he laid the two documents side by side, the original treaty and Crenshaw's filed claim. The discrepancy was obvious even to untrained eyes. Miles of difference. Acres of stolen land. The signature, Ayanna said, stepping forward. She pointed to the bottom of Crenshaw's survey. That is supposed to be my father's mark, but it is not. She looked at Tahatan. He nodded. I signed the true treaty 30 years ago, Tahatan said. I remember the day, the witnesses, the words we spoke. I never signed any document ceding our water rights. I never authorized any survey of our sacred lands. His voice hardened. Silas Crenshaw forged my name to steal what was not his to take. The room erupted. Morton's gavel pounded uselessly against the noise. Crenshaw's lawyers were shouting objections, and through it all, Crenshaw himself stood frozen, his mask finally cracking, the reality of what was happening settling over him like a shroud. This is absurd, he spat. The word of savages against documented surveys, the word of a treaty recognized by the United States government. Aldridge cut in. His voice was steady now, his eyes fixed on Morton. Your Honor, I have records of 3 prior cases where Mr. Crenshaw's surveys were vacated for fraud. 3 separate courts found his boundary claims to be deliberately falsified. He held up the files. This is a pattern, a documented, provable pattern. Morton's face had gone pale. He looked at Crenshaw, then at the evidence, then at the 1,000 riders visible through the window. The calculation was clear in his eyes. Bought loyalty versus self-preservation. Self-preservation won. In light of this evidence, Morton said slowly, I am compelled to suspend all proceedings pending a full investigation into the validity of Mr. Crenshaw's surveys. You can't do this. Crenshaw lunged toward the bench and stopped when he saw Eli standing in his path. The branding iron gleamed in Eli's hand. He hadn't raised it as a weapon, just held it, the Garrett brand facing outward, the symbol of everything Crenshaw had tried to steal. I told you once, Eli said quietly. I've never branded an innocent thing in my life. He met Crenshaw's eyes. But you ain't innocent. Sheriff Dunning stepped forward from the crowd. The deputy star on his chest caught the light, the same star he'd given Eli the night before, now reclaimed and worn with purpose. Silas Crenshaw, Dunning said, I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted theft of federal treaty land. The click of handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. Outside, the 1,000 riders hadn't moved. They sat in perfect formation, watching as Crenshaw was led from the land office in chains, watching as the townspeople gathered to stare, their faces a mixture of fear and wonder. Watching as Eli and Ayanna stepped out into the morning light, the satchel finally empty, its contents no longer needed. Tahatan stood at the edge of the boardwalk, his face unreadable. Ayanna approached him slowly, each step weighted with years of silence and separation. She stopped an arm's length away, her chin lifted, her eyes steady. I defied you, she said. I acted without permission. I brought shame to our family. Yes, I would do it again. Tahatan was silent for a long moment. Behind him, a hawk circled slow against the brightening sky. Then he reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. I know, he said, and for the first time, something that might have been pride flickered in his eyes. That is why I came. The judge's chambers smelled of old leather and older lies. Morton sat behind his desk, smaller now than he'd seemed on the bench, the authority stripped from him like bark from a dead tree. Aldridge stood at his shoulder with a stack of documents, each one a nail in Crenshaw's coffin. And in the corner, still in chains, Silas Crenshaw watched his empire crumble with the eyes of a man who'd never imagined this ending. All claims filed by Mr. Crenshaw in this territory are hereby suspended pending full review, Morton read, his voice flat, defeated. The emergency auction of the Garrett property is vacated. All obstruction charges against Eli Garrett are dismissed. He looked up at Eli, and there was something in his expression. Not quite shame, but close. Your tax debt, Mr. Garrett, has been reassessed. Given the circumstances, the territorial office has agreed to extend your payment deadline by 1 year. 1 year. Eli let the words sink in. A year to rebuild, a year to breathe. What about the treaty lands? Ayanna asked. She stood beside her father, the space between them smaller now than it had been that morning. Aldridge answered. The original boundaries will be restored. Mr. Crenshaw's surveys are void. Any structures or improvements made on disputed land will be subject to tribal approval. But he paused, adjusting his spectacles. It's not perfect justice. Some of what was taken can't be given back. But it's a start. Tahatan stepped forward. The room seemed to contract around him. every eye drawn to his presence. For 30 years, I have watched men like Crenshaw take what was not theirs, he said. They came with papers and promises. They drew lines on maps and called it law. They took our water, our hunting grounds, the bones of our ancestors. His voice was steady, but underneath it ran a current of something deeper, grief, maybe? Or the exhaustion of fighting battles that never seemed to end. But today, a different kind of man stood in our defense. He turned to Eli. The two men faced each other, the rancher and the chief, the settler and the elder, two sides of a history written in blood and broken treaties. You sheltered my daughter when it cost you everything, Tahatan said. You did not ask for payment. You did not expect reward. You acted with honor when honor was the harder path. Eli shook his head. I just did what was right. Yes. Tahatan's eyes held his. And that is rarer than you know. He reached out, and Eli realized the chief was gesturing toward the branding iron still clutched in his hand. Eli hesitated, then handed it over. Tahatan examined it carefully, turned it in his weathered hands, studying the Garrett brand, the worn handle, the marks of 40 years of use. The iron had shaped cattle, marked property, defined the boundaries of Eli's life. Now it sat in the hands of a man who understood what boundaries really meant. Among my people, Tahatan said, a man is known by what he creates, not what he destroys. He handed the iron back. You are a man who makes things, Eli Garrett. You are welcome on our land. Always. The weight of the iron felt different now, heavier and lighter at the same time. Thank you, Eli said. It wasn't enough, but it was all he had. Tahatan nodded once. Then he turned to his daughter. We should go. Our people are waiting. Ayanna looked at her father, then at Eli. Something passed between her and the chief. A silent conversation, in a language Eli couldn't speak, but somehow understood. Permission, maybe, or acknowledgement. Tahatan walked to the door and stopped there, his back to the room. I will wait outside, he said. Take the time you need. Then he was gone. And Eli and Ayanna were alone in a room that suddenly felt too small for everything they weren't saying. They walked out together, into the afternoon light. The 1,000 riders were still there, but they'd shifted formation, opening a path through their ranks, a corridor of horses and faces that led toward the eastern horizon. The townspeople lined the boardwalks, watching in silence. Some looked afraid. Others looked like they were seeing something they'd never expected to see and didn't quite know what to make of it. Ayanna stopped at the edge of the boardwalk, where the wooden planks gave way to packed dirt. Behind her, her people waited. Ahead of her, the life she'd known for the past week, the barn, the cabin, the man who'd risked everything for a stranger. I have to go, she said. I know. She turned to face him fully. The afternoon sun caught the silver at her wrists, the lines of her face, the quiet strength that had been there since the moment he'd found her bleeding in his barn. You saved my life, she said. You believed me when no one else would. You fought for me when you had nothing left to fight with. Her voice caught slightly, and she paused to steady it. I will not forget. Ayanna, she reached up and touched his face. Her palm was warm against his weathered cheek, her fingers rough from work and weather. The same gesture she had made in the cabin, in the dark hours when they'd both thought they might not survive. Among my people, she said softly, we have a word for someone who gives without expecting return. Someone who sees the need and answers it, not because of blood or law, but because it is right. She smiled, just slightly. The closest translation is family. Eli covered her hand with his own, held it there for a moment, feeling the warmth, the reality of it. I reckon that's what neighbors do, he said. Then we are neighbors. Her smile deepened, touched with something bittersweet. And among my people, neighbors visit. She pulled something from the pouch at her belt, a small carved figure, a hawk, wings spread, fashioned from wood so old it had turned the color of honey. The craftsmanship was delicate, precise, the work of hands that knew what they were making and why. My mother made this, Ayanna said, pressing it into his palm. She gave it to me when I was small, to protect me on long journeys. Her eyes met his. I think you need it now more than I do. The hawk was warm from her body heat. Eli closed his fingers around it, feeling the smooth curves, the spread wings, the tiny details that spoke of love and patience and time. I can't take this. You already have. She stepped back, her hand falling from his face. Keep it. Remember me. Ayanna, I know. She stopped him with a look. I know, but right now I must go home. I must mend what I broke with my father. I must help my people rebuild what Crenshaw tried to take. Her chin lifted. And you must do the same. She was right. He knew she was right. It didn't make it easier. Will I see you again? She smiled, real this time. warm and bright and full of something that might have been promise. "The spring branding is in 6 moons," she said. "A good farrier is hard to find. My father may have need of one." Then she turned and walked toward the waiting riders. Her father helped her mount, and for a moment she looked back. One last glance, one last connection, before the formation closed around her. The 1,000 riders began to move. The thunder of hooves built slowly, then swelled, then faded as they rode east toward the mesas, toward home, toward a future Eli couldn't see but could almost imagine. He watched until the dust settled, until the last horse disappeared over the ridge, until the town behind him began to stir again, returning to normal life as if 1,000 warriors hadn't just stood in their streets. Doc Virgil appeared at his elbow. "You gonna be all right?" Eli looked at the carved hawk in his hand, then at the horizon, still faintly golden with the dust of their passing. "Reckon I will." 6 months later, the land looked different. The well ran clean now. A joint water-sharing agreement with the Apache meant Eli's cattle drank from the same creek Ayanna's people had used for generations. The herd had doubled, new calves born in spring, healthy and strong and marked with the Garrett brand. Turns out, good neighbors made better fences than barbed wire ever did. Eli rebuilt the barn that summer, fixed the sagging roof, replaced the rotted boards, hung a new door that didn't creak when the wind blew. The work was hard, but it felt different now, purposeful, like he was building toward something instead of just holding on. Doc Virgil came by on Sundays. They'd sit on the porch and watch the light change, not saying much. Sometimes Virgil brought news from town. Crenshaw had gotten 15 years in territorial prison. The widow from 3 counties over had gotten her land back. Sheriff Dunning had run for office, won in a landslide. Turned out, folks respected a lawman who remembered what the badge was supposed to mean. "Heard they're naming the new county seat after you," Virgil said one evening, smoke from his pipe curling into the twilight. "That's a damn lie, and you know it," Virgil chuckled. "Maybe, but it makes a good story." The branding iron hung on its hook above the forge, polished now, honored. The carved hawk sat on the windowsill, where the morning light could catch it, and in the back of the Bible, pressed between the Old Testament and the New, the letter Eli had written on that dark night remained. Not needed, but not forgotten. Some truths were worth keeping, even when no one else would ever read them. Some mornings, Eli found himself looking toward Red Mesa, watching the light change on the distant ridges, wondering if she was watching too. It was foolish, probably, a man his age thinking thoughts like that. But the heart didn't care much for age or wisdom. It wanted what it wanted, and it had the patience to wait. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a rider Eli didn't recognize. A young Apache man, barely 20, with the bearing of someone trusted with important errands. He handed over a folded paper without dismounting, nodded once, and rode back the way he'd come. Eli opened it on the porch, the afternoon sun warm on his shoulders. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. Each English word chosen with the precision of someone writing in a second language. The letter sloped slightly to the right, and here and there, a word was crossed out and corrected. "Eli, Garrett, the spring branding begins next month. The colts need shoes before they can be trained, and the old forge at Red Mesa has not been lit in many years. My father says a good farrier is hard to find. I told him I know one. The hawk still protects you, I hope. I have thought of it often since we parted, and of the man who carries it. Come when you are ready. Stay as long as you choose. You will be welcomed as family. No signature. Just a small drawing at the bottom, a hawk in flight, wings spread, the same posture as the carving on his windowsill." Eli read it twice, 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, over his heart. He walked to the barn where his horse was stabled, stood there for a long moment, looking at the saddle, the road, the horizon. His whole life had been spent choosing between what was safe and what was right, and right had nearly cost him everything. But it had also given him this, a second chance. A door left open, a future he hadn't dared to imagine. He thought about Martha, buried on the hill behind the cabin where the wildflowers grew thick in spring. About his father, who'd made the branding iron with his own hands and taught him that a man's work was his legacy. About all the years he'd spent alone, holding on to land, because he'd forgotten what else there was to hold. The dust don't lie. It shows every track, every choice, every place a man stood his ground or cut and ran. But it also shows where a man's headed next. Eli Garrett went inside to pack his saddlebags, and for the first time, in longer than he could remember, he knew exactly where he was going.